I'm Isabella Wright, 32, and tonight was supposed to be a simple dinner at my parents' house. After barely speaking to my father for 3 years, I reluctantly agreed to attend his important business dinner as a favor to my mom. I arrived in my tailored blazer portfolio tucked under my arm, professional. As always, the moment I stepped into the foyer, my father's face contorted with panic. "Wait in the car." Dad hissed, shoving me away from his business dinner. "We need these investors. If only he knew who I really was." Before I continue this wild story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that subscribe button and stick around. You won't believe what happened when the walked in and saw me sitting in my father's driveway. My childhood home in suburban Connecticut always felt more like my father's satellite office than a place where a family lived. Robert Wright built his tech company, Rightway Solutions, from nothing, a fact he reminded us of daily. The dining room table regularly disappeared beneath blueprints and financial spreadsheets, rather than home-cooked meals on the rare occasions we ate together. Conversation inevitably centered around circuit boards and investor meetings. My mother, Grace, floated through our home like a pleasant ghost, rearranging flowers and making excuses for my father's absence at school events. "Your father's building something important," she'd say, smoothing my hair. "He's doing it all for us." I stopped believing that around age 12 when I realized he was doing it for himself. James, my older brother by 4 years, was the golden child, a mirror image of our father with his analytical mind and singular focus. By 14, he was already programming small applications that made our father beam with pride. "That's my boy," he'd say, clapping James on the shoulder while I sat ignored at the same table. I wasn't without talent. Computers fascinated me just as much as they did James, but whenever I tried to join their technical conversations, my father would smile indulgently. "Why don't you help your mother with dinner? Kenzie, this stuff isn't really for you." When I was 16, I built my own computer from parts I'd saved up for, excitedly calling my father to see. He glanced at it for all of 10 seconds before handing me a pamphlet for fashion merchandising programs. "This is more your speed. Honey, technology is a tough business for women." That night, I made a decision I would pursue technology on my own terms without his approval or knowledge. I maintained the fiction that I was studying communications at college while actually double majoring in computer science and business administration. I worked twice as hard as my classmates, knowing I couldn't come home for help if I struggled the day of my graduation. When I walked across the stage to receive my actual diploma, my father's expression shifted from confusion to disappointment. "You lied to us for 4 years, he asked later, at what should have been my celebration dinner. "I didn't lie," I replied calmly. "I just didn't correct your assumptions. And now, what you'll struggle for years trying to break into a field where men have all the advantages when you could have joined Rightway from the beginning." I'd already accepted a position at Blue Horizon Tech, one of his competitors, not out of spite, but because their innovation excited me more than his outdated business model. When I told him, he actually laughed in my face. "They're hiring you as a diversity prop, Isabella. You'll be answering phones within 6 months when they realize you're out of your depth." My mother gasped. James stared at his plate, and something final broke between my father and me. "I guess we'll see," was all I said before. Walking out, for the next 3 years, I limited contact to brief calls with my mother and occasional texts with James. I poured everything into my career at Blue Horizon, starting in product development and quickly rising through the ranks as my innovations drove company growth. I worked 18-hour days, sacrificed relationships, and pushed myself beyond exhaustion. When promotion opportunities came, I seized them: project manager within a year, director of development the following year, and then vice president of innovation. Each step validated what I'd always known: I belonged in this industry. Meanwhile, through my mother's updates, I learned that Rightway Solutions was struggling. My father had failed to adapt to changing markets, stubbornly sticking to hardware. When the industry had shifted to cloud-based solutions, James tried implementing changes. But my father resisted his own son's suggestions last week. My mother called, sounding more anxious than usual. "Your father's arranged a dinner with potential investors." She said, "It's important, Kenzie. The company might not survive without this funding." "What does that have to do with me?" I asked, reviewing quarterly projections on my second monitor while we spoke. "He's asking for you to be there. A family united front. Please, for me." I should have asked more questions. I should have pressed for details about these mysterious investors. But after just being appointed president of Blue Horizon, a promotion I hadn't shared with my family yet, I was drowning in work, and agreed just to end the conversation. "Fine, text me the details, but I'm not pretending we're one big happy family. Thank you, sweetheart." It means more than you know. And that's how I found myself driving to my parents' house after 3 years of minimal contact, about to walk into a business dinner that would change everything. The humiliation burned hot across my face as I retreated down the front steps of my childhood home. My father's dismissive gesture, a hand waving me away like an annoying insect, felt like a slap through the bay window. I could see the dining room table set with my mother's best china place settings for 6 arranged perfectly. My mother shot me an apologetic glance before disappearing into the kitchen. I stood in the driveway, car keys digging into my palm where I'd clenched my fist. Part of me, the part still seeking paternal approval after all these years, wanted to obey, to slide back into my Audi and wait like a chastised child. But the executive who'd closed million-dollar deals and led teams of brilliant engineers wanted to march back in and demand respect. Unbelievable, I muttered, unlocking my car and sliding into the driver's seat. I'd taken time away from my overwhelming first week as president to be here, and he couldn't even let me through the door. The leather seat cooled my anger somewhat as I pulled out my phone to check emails. If I was banished to the car, I might as well be productive. 43 new messages since I'd left the office. 2 hours ago, I scrolled through them, responding to the most urgent. My assistant had organized the transition briefings for tomorrow. Legal needed my signature on the revised terms for the Singapore acquisition. Our director of engineering required approval for additional resources on Project Nexus. A notification banner slid down from the top of my screen, a message from Marcus Reynolds, Blue Horizon's CEO, and now technically my direct report. Though our relationship had always been more collaborative than hierarchical, running 15 minutes late to right meeting traffic nightmare. Brief me before I arrive here. The father is difficult but techro promising. I froze reading the message twice. Marcus was heading to a meeting with someone named Wright, who had a difficult father and promising technology. The coincidence seemed impossible, yet the timing aligned perfectly with my father's investor dinner. I typed back quickly. Marcus, to confirm your meeting with Robert Wright of Rightway Solutions tonight. His response came seconds later. Yes, small company, outdated model, but their new security protocol could solve our government contract issues. Didn't realize you knew them. My hands trembled slightly as I responded. Robert Wright is my father. I'm currently sitting in his driveway after being told to wait in the car during your meeting. He doesn't know I'm Blue Horizon's new president. The 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times before Marcus's reply. This is unexpected. Stay where you are, arriving in 10. We'll handle this. Delicately, I set my phone down and stared through the windshield at the house where I grew up. The universe had orchestrated the perfect collision of my past and present. My father had been pursuing investment from my company, the very competitor he'd mocked me for joining, and now I, the daughter he dismissed as incapable of understanding technology, held decision-making power over his company's future. The irony was almost too perfect. I watched the street from Marcus's car while sorting through my conflicting emotions. Professional ethics demanded objectivity about Rightway's technology, regardless of personal history. But human nature made me savor the coming revelation after years of condescension. My father would learn exactly what I'd accomplished without his support. A black Tesla I didn't recognize pulled into the driveway, and Amanda Miller, Blue Horizon's CFO, stepped out. I hadn't realized she would be attending. Amanda had been my mentor when I first joined the company, recognizing my potential long before anyone else. Seeing her tall figure striding confidently toward my parents' door cemented my decision. I wasn't going to hide in my car like an obedient daughter. I was going to walk back into that house as Isabella Wright, president of Blue Horizon Tech. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, reapplied my lipstick, and stepped out of the car as I approached the front door. For the second time that evening, I squared my shoulders and lifted my chin. This time, no one would be sending me away. I timed my entrance perfectly, slipping in behind the housekeeper who'd answered Amanda's knock. My father stood in the foyer, hand extended in, greeting, his businessman's smile firmly in place, the one that never quite reached his eyes. Mrs. Miller, welcome to our home. We're honored you could. His words died as he registered my presence behind Amanda. The smile faltered, panic flashing across his features before he recovered. Isabella, I thought I asked you to. Amanda turned genuine surprise, crossing her face. Isabella, I didn't realize you'd be here tonight. Before I could respond, my father stepped between us, attempting damage control. My daughter was just leaving. Unfortunately, prior commitment. He shot me a warning glance. Right, Kenzie. I stepped forward, extending my hand to Amanda with deliberate professionalism. Actually, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I wouldn't miss this dinner for anything. Amanda's eyes darted between us, sensing the tension, but professionally maintaining her composure. My father's jaw tightened as he realized I wasn't going to be dismissed a second time. "Well, come in then," he said tightly, gesturing toward the dining room where my mother and brother were already seated with another man I didn't recognize, likely one of the private investors Amanda and Marcus had brought along. My mother's eyes widened, seeing me enter. James looked confused, but nodded a greeting. The stranger rose politely as Amanda and I approached. "This is my daughter, Isabella." My father said dismissively. "She happened to be in town, and this is my son James, who heads our development team." The way he emphasized son and development team, while minimalizing my presence, was so familiar, it almost made me laugh. Something's never changed. Richard Blackwood. The stranger introduced himself with a firm handshake. "Venture capital." We took our seats, my father visibly uncomfortable with my presence but unable to object. Without creating an awkward scene, my mother nervously distributed the appetizers she'd prepared while my father launched into his practiced pitch about Rightway's illustrious 20-year history in the industry. "We've consistently delivered hardware solutions that prioritize security and reliability," he said, sliding glossy brochures across the table. While others chased trends, we maintained our commitment to quality. James nodded along, occasionally adding technical specifications that seemed to interest Amanda and Richard. I remained silent, observing the dynamic and noting how my father presented the company's stagnation as steadfast principles, rather than failure to innovate. Our latest security protocol represents a breakthrough in government-grade encryption. My father continued. James explained the technical advantages to our guests as James detailed the protocol's architecture. I recognized elements of a project I'd worked on during my final year of college, ideas I'd once tried to share with my father, only to be ignored. Amanda caught my eye during James's explanation. "Isabella, what are your thoughts on this approach? Does it align with current industry standards?" The table fell silent. My father's expression tightened. "Isabella isn't involved in the technical aspects of our business, actually," I said, setting down my water glass. "The approach is sound, but not revolutionary. Similar protocols have been implemented by at least 3 competitors in the last 18 months. The real value would be in how it's integrated with cloud architecture." James looked at me. "With newfound curiosity, you've been keeping up with security protocols, you could say that," I replied, maintaining eye contact with my brother rather than looking at our father's darkening expression. Amanda seemed to be reassessing the entire situation. "Mackenzie, I didn't realize you were familiar with the Wright family beyond our brief mention of the meeting." "Very familiar," I said with a small smile. "I grew up in this house." The doorbell rang, saving my father from having to respond. His relief was palpable as he excused himself to greet who I knew must be Marcus. My mother used the interruption to escape to the kitchen, while James leaned toward me. "What are you doing?" he whispered. "Dad's been working on this deal for months." "Just being honest about the technology," I replied. "Isn't that what investors deserve?" Amanda overheard and raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Richard was reviewing the brochures, seemingly oblivious to the family drama unfolding around him. Voices approached from the foyer. My father's overly enthusiastic tone carried down the hallway. "We're delighted you could join us, Mr. Reynolds. I understand you had some travel difficulties." Nothing significant came. Marcus's familiar voice. "Sometimes Boston. Traffic has its own agenda." They entered the dining room, my father leading the way with Marcus following closely behind. At first, Marcus didn't notice me, his attention on greeting Amanda and Richard. Then his gaze swept around the table and landed on me. The momentary widening of his eyes was the only break in his professional demeanor. He recovered instantly, but what he did next changed the entire dynamic of the room. Marcus Reynolds, CEO of Blue Horizon Tech, and one of the most respected figures in the industry, stopped short, straightened his posture, and inclined his head respectfully in my direction. "Madam President," he said, his tone deferential. "I didn't expect to see you here tonight." A weighted silence blanketed the room. My father stood frozen beside Marcus, his expression cycling rapidly through confusion, disbelief, and dawning comprehension. My mother, returning from the kitchen with a serving dish, nearly dropped it as she registered Marcus's words. "I'm sorry." My father finally managed, his voice strained. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. This is my daughter, Isabella." Marcus looked between us, genuine surprise replacing his initial shock. "Yes. Isabella Wright, the newly appointed president of Blue Horizon Technologies." He turned to me with an apologetic smile. "I didn't make the connection between Rightway Solutions and your family name, though perhaps I should have all eyes shifted to me." Richard Blackwood sat down his drink with deliberate care. Amanda's lips curved into a subtle, satisfied smile. James stared as though seeing me for the first time. President. My father repeated the words sounding foreign in his mouth. I maintained my composure, though my heart hammered. Against my ribs, the announcement went out internally. Last week. The press release is scheduled for Monday. My father sank slowly into his chair. The man who had dismissed me from his dinner hour ago now looked as though the floor had disappeared beneath him. You're the president of Blue Horizon, our competitor. Yes, I said simply. The memory of my college graduation dinner flashed vividly in my mind. My father's dismissive laugh, his certainty that I'd be answering phones within 6 months. The contrast between that prediction and my current reality couldn't have been more stark. Why didn't you tell us? My mother asked, finally setting down the serving dish she'd been clutching. Would it have mattered? I kept my voice neutral, though the question was genuine. Dad made his opinions about my capabilities very clear. Years ago, James leaned forward, elbows on the table. You've been at Blue Horizon this whole time, working your way up, starting in product development, then project management director of innovation, vice president, and now president. I confirmed it's been a busy 3 years. Marcus cleared his throat, addressing the stunned table. Isabella has been instrumental in Blue Horizon's growth. Our market valuation has tripled since she joined the company, largely due to innovations she spearheaded. My father's face had drained of color. I remembered his words the day I'd announced my job offer. They're hiring you as a diversity prop. Isabella, how certain he'd been. How wrong Richard Blackwood, who until now had been silently observing the family drama, finally spoke well. This certainly changes the dynamics of our meeting. He turned to me with newfound interest. I assume you're familiar with your father's proposal? Then actually I'm not, I replied. Honestly, I was only invited to this dinner this afternoon, and I wasn't aware that Blue Horizon was the potential investor until Marcus texted me from his car. Fascinating, Richard murmured, looking between my father and me with the keen assessment of someone who'd built a career evaluating not just business proposals, but the people behind them. My mother, ever the peacemaker, attempted to normalize the situation. Well, why don't we all sit down and enjoy dinner while we discuss business? I've prepared Robert's favorite beef. Wellington Amanda exchanged glances with Marcus before addressing my father. Mr. Wright, given this unexpected development, perhaps we should reconsider the structure of tonight's discussion. My father seemed to shrink in his chair, the confident businessman persona crumbling. I felt a complicated mix of emotions, satisfaction at the recognition I'd earned, but also an unexpected pang seeing him so diminished. Yes, of course, he said, his voice hollow. Whatever you think is best. The power dynamic had shifted completely. Investors who had arrived to evaluate my father's company were now deferring to me. The daughter who had been told to wait in the car was now effectively in control of the meeting. Marcus, ever the diplomat, smoothed over the awkward moment. I think we should proceed with dinner and our planned discussion. The technology itself deserves evaluation on its own merits, regardless of personal connections. He looked to me for confirmation. I nodded agreement. Absolutely, we're all professionals here. As my mother began serving dinner, the conversation tentatively resumed, but now questions that had been directed to my father were instead posed to me. Richard wanted to know my assessment of market trends. Amanda asked about integration possibilities with our existing product line. Even James began addressing his technical explanations to me, rather than our father. Throughout it all, my father remained uncharacteristically silent, watching me handle complex questions with the expertise he'd never believed I possessed. I caught him several times studying me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher, perhaps seeing me clearly for the first time in his life. When dessert was served, my mother attempted to steer the conversation toward safer territory. Isabella, tell us about your new apartment. Are you still in Cambridge, actually? I've moved to the Seaport District. The commute to our headquarters is easier. I took a small bite of the chocolate torch she'd prepared. This is delicious, Mom. She is a corner office overlooking the harbor, Marcus added, though she's rarely in it, always in the development lab or meeting with clients. My father sat down his fork. So you're actually involved in the technical work, not just the business side. The question revealed how little he understood about my career. I hold 7 patents for Blue Horizon, Dad. I lead our innovation team while overseeing company operations. He nodded slowly, absorbing this information. The man who had once told me technology wasn't for women was now confronted with irrefutable evidence of my technical abilities. I had no idea, he said quietly. The simple admission was perhaps the closest thing to an apology I would get. As coffee was served, the conversation inevitably returned to the purpose of the meeting: Rightway's security protocol and the potential investment from Blue Horizon. But now I was clearly the decision maker at the table. "Let's discuss the details of your proposal," I said, meeting my father's eyes directly. "I'd like to hear exactly what you're looking for from Blue Horizon." The dining room transformed into an impromptu boardroom as my father reluctantly began outlining Rightway's proposal. His usual confidence had abandoned him, replaced by a hesitancy I'd never witnessed before. He fumbled through the first few minutes, repeatedly checking my expression for reactions. "We're seeking a strategic investment of $3 million to scale our security protocol," he explained, sliding a folder toward me rather than Marcus. "With proper funding, we believe we can capture 15% of the government security market within 18 months. I opened the folder and scanned the projections immediately, identifying several overly optimistic assumptions. These market penetration estimates seem aggressive given the established competition. I noted, "What's your strategy for differentiating from CyberShield's similar protocol that launched last quarter?" My father faltered. "CyberShield has a comparable product." James jumped in, clearly better informed about the competitive landscape. "Their approach uses a different encryption method, but you're right about the overlap. We believe our implementation is more efficient and offers better protection against quantum computing threats." I nodded, impressed by my brother's assessment. "That's a valid advantage, though. The quantum threat timeline is still theoretical." "Walk me through your architecture." James stood and sketched a diagram on the notepad he brought, explaining the technical underpinnings with clear expertise. I asked pointed questions about scalability, integration capabilities, and resource requirements areas I knew would concern our government clients. "The core encryption engine is solid," I acknowledged after his explanation, "but your deployment model is outdated. Government agencies are migrating to cloud infrastructure, which this doesn't adequately address." My father frowned. "Our clients value physical security. Cloud solutions introduce vulnerabilities that—" Was true 5 years ago, I countered, "but zero-trust architecture has largely mitigated those concerns. The Pentagon itself has moved 80% of non-classified operations to secure cloud environments." Amanda nodded in agreement. "The market is definitely heading that direction." My father looked to James for support, but my brother reluctantly sided with me. "She's right, Dad. I've tried to discuss cloud integration before, but you were convinced clients wouldn't accept it." The tension in my father's jaw revealed his discomfort at being contradicted by both his children in front of potential investors. I could have pressed the advantage, highlighting all the ways Rightway had failed to evolve under his leadership, but that would have been personal, not professional. Instead, I redirected the core technology has value, particularly the encryption method James described with modifications. It could complement our existing government solutions portfolio. Marcus, who had been quietly observing the family dynamics while taking notes, finally spoke. "What would those modifications entail in your assessment?" "A complete restructuring of the deployment architecture, integration with our cloud security framework, and updated threat modeling," I replied, "essentially preserving the encryption engine while rebuilding everything around it." My father's expression darkened. "So you'd strip away everything except the one component my son developed?" The comment revealed more than he probably intended, an acknowledgement that James, not him, had created the valuable element of their technology. "I'm evaluating this as I would any potential acquisition," I explained, evenly identifying which components add value to our existing ecosystem and which don't. Richard Blackwood, who had been silently assessing the discussion, leaned forward. "If I may offer an observation, this seems less like an investment opportunity and more like an acquisition target. The protocol itself has merit, but the business infrastructure appears insufficient to compete." Independently, my father's face flushed. "Rightway has been independent for 20 years. We're not looking to be absorbed by a larger company." "Dad," James interjected gently, "we need to be realistic. We've lost market share every quarter for the past 3 years. The protocol is promising, but we don't have the resources to scale it properly." It was the first I'd heard about just how dire their situation had become. My mother's worried glance at my father confirmed James's assessment. "What exactly is your current runway?" I asked, shifting into full business evaluation mode. My father hesitated before admitting for months at current burn rate the situation was worse than I'd imagined. No wonder my mother had been so insistent about this dinner. They weren't just seeking growth capital, they were fighting for survival. "I see 3 potential paths forward," I said after a moment's consideration. "First, a limited investment focused specifically on commercializing the encryption protocol as a standalone product. Second, an acquisition of the intellectual property and key technical staff. Or third, a structured wind-down, where we license the technology and provide transition opportunities for your team members. My clinical assessment seemed to hit my father physically. The man who had built the company from nothing was now hearing options for its end. Is there no scenario where Right Way continues as is? He asked quietly. I met his gaze directly based on what I've heard tonight. No, the market has evolved beyond your current business model. The valuable technology could survive, but the company structure as it exists today isn't viable long-term. A heavy silence followed my assessment. Marcus and Amanda exchanged glances, clearly impressed by my objectivity. Despite the personal connection, Richard Blackwood studied my father with the detached interest of someone watching a case study unfold. James surprised me by speaking up. I think we need to consider the acquisition options seriously. Dad, it would preserve what we've built while providing the resources to actually implement it properly. My father's hands clenched on the table for a moment. I thought he might erupt in anger the Robert Wright I remembered would have. Instead, he asked in a controlled voice, and what would happen to our team people who've been loyal to us for years? The question revealed a concern I hadn't expected, not for himself but for his employees. Perhaps I'd misjudged some aspects of his character. In an acquisition scenario, we'd evaluate each position against our current structure. I explained technical roles, particularly those involved with the protocol development, would likely transition. Some redundant positions would receive competitive severance packages. And me? He asked the question hanging heavily in the air. The room went silent. Everyone recognized the significance of the moment, a father asking his daughter about his professional fate. That would depend on what role you want. Dad, I answered honestly, if you're looking to stay involved, we could discuss a transitional advisory position. If you're ready to step back, we'd ensure a respectful exit with appropriate recognition for the company you built. He nodded slowly, absorbing my words after a long moment. He looked around the table at the investors, then at James, and finally back to me. I need to make a call, he said, rising from his chair. Please excuse me for a moment. As he left the room, I found myself at a crossroads: stay and continue the professional discussion, or follow and have the personal conversation that had been brewing for years. Take 10 minutes, Marcus suggested quietly, reading my hesitation. We'll discuss the technical aspects with James. I stood and followed my father out of the dining room. I found my father standing on the back porch, staring out at the garden. My mother had meticulously maintained for decades the motion-activated lights, illuminated his profile. And for the first time, I noticed how much he had aged since I'd seen him last. His shoulders, once perpetually squared with confidence, now curved slightly inward. He heard my approach but didn't turn immediately. I always thought James would eventually take over Right Way, he said to the night air. Never imagined I'd be negotiating its end with my daughter. It doesn't have to be the end, I replied, stopping beside him at the railing. The technology can continue evolve. That's how innovation works. He finally turned to face me. You evolved beyond what I thought possible. The question hung between us, complex and loaded with years of misunderstanding. I should have been in the car when your CEO arrived. He continued before I could respond. That was inappropriate of me, coming from my father. This awkward acknowledgement was the equivalent of a profound apology. I accepted it with a small nod. Why didn't you tell us? He asked, genuine confusion in his voice. About your promotions, your success. Your mother would have been so proud. Would you have been proud? I countered quietly. Or would you have found a way to diminish it like you always did? He flinched slightly. Was I really that bad? Do you remember my 17th birthday? I asked instead of answering directly. He frowned clearly, searching his memory. I showed you the algorithm I developed for predictive text. This was before it was common on phones. I'd spent months working on it, taught myself 2 programming languages to build it. His expression remained blank. You glanced at it for maybe 30 seconds, said, "That's nice, honey," and then spent the rest of the evening helping James debug his college project. The memory still stung even after all these years. That was the pattern. My achievements were nice. James's were revolutionary. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by genuine regret. I didn't see it then, how I treated you differently. You told me technology wasn't for women. Dad, you actively discouraged me from the path I was clearly meant to follow. He ran a hand over his face. I was wrong. Obviously, spectacularly wrong. He gestured vaguely toward the dining room where Marcus and the others waited. The president of Blue Horizon, he said, shaking his head in disbelief. My daughter. The pride that had been absent all my life was suddenly evident in his voice. And to my surprise, it still mattered. The little girl who had yearned for her father's approval felt a warmth she'd long ago stopped expecting. I didn't set out to prove you wrong, I said softly. I just couldn't be anyone but myself. I wish I'd known who you really were, he replied. I was so caught up in my own vision of what you should be that I never saw what you could be. The back door opened, spilling light onto the porch as my mother stepped out. She'd removed her hostess apron and looked between us with cautious hope. Everything okay out here? She asked. We're talking, Mom? I assured her. Really talking maybe for the first time. She moved to my father's side, her hand finding his automatically. Your father called me last week after he found out Blue Horizon might be interested in the company. He was so excited about potentially working with you, even though he didn't know you were in leadership there. He said it might be a chance to repair things between you two. I looked at my father in surprise. Is that true? He nodded, somewhat embarrassed. I may have tracked your career more than you realized. Not the president part. That shocked me completely, but I knew you were doing well there. I thought maybe if our companies had a relationship, we might have a reason to reconnect. The revelation shifted something fundamental in my understanding of the past 3 years. While I'd been assuming he'd written me off completely, he'd apparently been following my progress from a distance. I should have been bigger than my pride. He admitted should have reached out directly, instead of creating this business pretense. The back door opened again, and James stepped out, his expression a mix of curiosity and concern. Everyone's wondering if we're still having a meeting, or if this has become exclusively a family therapy session, he said, attempting humor but clearly uncomfortable. We're coming back in, my father assured him. Then to my surprise, he asked, What do you think about the acquisition option, James? Honestly, my brother seemed startled by the direct question. I think Isabella's right, he said after a moment's consideration. Our technology deserves a chance to reach its potential, and Blue Horizon has the infrastructure to make that happen. The company name matters less than what we've built. My father nodded slowly, accepting his son's assessment with unexpected grace. And what about you? Would you want to join Blue Horizon if this goes forward? James glanced at me uncertainly. Would there be a place for me? Absolutely, I replied without hesitation. Your encryption work is brilliant. James, any company would be lucky to have you on their team, including ours. My brother smiled. Perhaps the first genuine smile we'd shared in years. That would be interesting, working together after all this time. My father straightened his shoulders, some of his businessman composure returning. Well, shall we go back in and discuss the details like professionals? I find myself suddenly open to options I wouldn't have considered an hour ago, as we turned toward the door. He paused, looking directly at me. Isabella, I was wrong about you about so many things. I'm sorry. It took this dramatic turn of events for me to see it coming from Robert Wright. This explicit acknowledgement of error was unprecedented. I recognized it for the significant step it represented. Better late than never. Dad, I replied, surprised by the emotion tightening my throat. Let's go see what we can build together. Finally. 3 months later, I stood in the doorway of my childhood home, a bottle of champagne in hand and a genuine smile on my face. The quarterly family dinner had become our new tradition, one I actually looked forward to rather than dreaded there. She is my mother, called emerging from the kitchen wearing an apron emblazoned with "World's Best Mom" that I'd given her for her birthday, right on time. My father appeared from his study, reading glasses perched on his nose and a tablet in hand. He'd aged backwards somehow in the past months, standing taller and moving with renewed energy. Isabella, I was just reviewing the integration numbers. Remarkable progress. The acquisition had gone through smoothly. Right way. Solutions officially became Blue Horizon's government security division, with James leading the technical team and my father serving as a strategic advisor during the transition. The encryption protocol integrated with our cloud architecture had already secured 2 major government contracts. The Pentagon meeting went well, my mother asked, taking the champagne and ushering me toward the living room. Better than expected. They've committed to implementing the security protocol across all non-classified systems. By next quarter, I slipped off my jacket and relaxed into the familiar sofa. James was brilliant in the technical demonstration. Your brother has always been good with the details, my father acknowledged, setting his tablet aside. But he needed your vision to see the bigger possibilities. You complement each other well. Such praise would have been unimaginable 4 months ago. The father who once dismissed my technological aptitude now regularly sought my input on strategic decisions, and proudly told anyone who would listen about his daughter's accomplishments. The doorbell rang, announcing James's arrival with his girlfriend Emma, whom he'd met during the company integration process. They entered laughing, carrying dessert from the bakery near Blue Horizon's offices. "Sorry we're late." James apologized. The team meeting ran long. "We've solved the latency issue in the protocol." "That's wonderful news," my father said, clapping him on the shoulder before turning to include me both. "My children revolutionizing cybersecurity. Who would have thought some of us saw the potential earlier than others?" My mother teased him, gently, the comment free of bitterness. My father took it with good humor. "The greatest mistake of my career was underestimating my daughter," he admitted openly. Thank goodness she didn't listen to me as we gathered around the dining table, the same one where our confrontation had unfolded months earlier. I marveled at the transformation in our family dynamics. My father, once the unquestioned authority on all matters, now regularly deferred to my professional judgment. My mother had found her voice no longer tiptoeing around his ego. James and I had developed the sibling relationship we should have had all along, built on mutual respect and collaboration. I invited Marcus and Amanda for next month's dinner. My father mentioned as we passed dishes around, "They've been instrumental in making this transition work. Amanda told me she knew you'd be running the company someday. My mother said she saw it from your first week." Apparently I smiled, remembering how Amanda had taken me under her wing when everyone else had underestimated me. She believed in me before I fully believed in myself. "That's what we should have done," my father said quietly. "Believed in who you actually were instead of who we thought you should be." "It wasn't all bad, Dad," I offered graciously. "Your expectations taught me perseverance. If you'd made everything easy, maybe I wouldn't have developed the resilience I needed." He considered this, then shook his head. "That's generous of you. But let's not rewrite history. I was wrong. Plain and simple. The best thing I can do now is acknowledge it and learn from it." His humility, so at odds with the father I'd grown up with, still surprised me. The business setbacks had broken something fundamental in his self-image, creating space for growth. Neither of us had anticipated over dessert. James raised his glass to family second chances he proposed, and to Isabella, who had every right to reject us, but chose reconciliation instead. To honesty, I countered, raising my own glass. Without that dinner confrontation, we might still be maintaining polite fictions instead of building something real. My father nodded thoughtfully. "The greatest lesson I've learned through all this is that success isn't measured by controlling everything and everyone around you. It's about recognizing potential in its many forms and having the wisdom to nurture it rather than reshape it." Speaking of recognizing potential, my mother interjected, "Your cousin Stephanie called today. Her daughter is interested in computer science but feeling discouraged by her male classmates. I thought perhaps you might talk with her." "Isabella," of course I agreed immediately. Remembering my own journey, I'd be happy to mentor her, and Right Horizon could offer her an internship next summer. James suggested using the nickname employees had given our division. "Start building the pipeline early." My father beamed with pride. Genuine pride that encompassed both his children equally. "Who knows? Maybe she'll be running the company after Isabella." The comment, delivered without a trace of his former sexism, marked how far he'd come. The man who once told me technology wasn't for women was now actively encouraging the next generation of female engineers. As dinner concluded, and we moved to the living room for coffee, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. The hurt child who'd left this house determined to prove her father wrong had become a woman secure enough to allow reconciliation without sacrificing her achievements or identity. "I've been thinking," my father said, settling into his favorite armchair, "about starting a foundation focused on girls in STEM, using some of the acquisition proceeds to fund scholarships and mentorship programs." "That's a wonderful idea," I encouraged him. "Blue Horizon would match the funding we've been looking to expand our community initiatives. I'd like to name it after you." He added, "the Isabella Wright Foundation for Innovation. If you're comfortable with that." The gesture, unexpected and meaningful, brought tears to my eyes. "I'd be honored, Dad." He nodded, emotion evident in his own expression. "It's time I put my resources behind my evolved beliefs. Actions matter more than words." As the evening wounded down and we prepared to depart, my father pulled me aside for a private moment. "I want you to know," he said quietly, "that even though I came to this realization far too late, I couldn't be prouder of the woman and leader you've become. And that's not because you proved me wrong or achieved professional success. It's because you had the courage to be authentically yourself, despite everything I did to discourage it. I hugged him. Then perhaps the first genuine embrace we'd shared in decades. Thank you for being willing to change. Dad, many people couldn't have admitted they were wrong so completely when the evidence is as overwhelming as a CEO bowing to your daughter. He chuckled. Only a fool would keep denying reality. Driving home that night, I reflected on the lessons of the past months. Sometimes the most profound growth comes through painful confrontations we'd rather avoid. Sometimes long-established patterns can change if we're brave enough to challenge them directly, and sometimes the validation we spend years chasing matters less than the self-belief we develop along the way. The young woman who'd been told to wait in the car had become the executive whose vision was reshaping an industry. But more importantly, she'd become someone who understood that true success isn't measured by titles but by the courage to remain authentic in a world that often rewards conformity. Sometimes the best revenge isn't making others pay for underestimating you. It's succeeding so tremendously that they have no choice but to recognize what they refused to see all along. What about you? Have you ever been underestimated by someone whose opinion mattered to you? How did you handle it? Share your story in the comments below, and if this tale of redemption and professional triumph resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of perseverance and success. Remember, the people who underestimate you don't determine your worth. Your courage to remain true to yourself does. Thank you for listening. And until next time, believe in your own potential, even when others don't.